Good evening and welcome to Inside the Rookery, live from CYMERA Festival in Edinburgh, where we are discussing Eldritch Horror in Play with Lynne Hardy and Stuart Boone from Chaosium. Welcome to the show. Welcome to our live audience. Big cheer, live audience. And welcome, as always, to everyone in the chat, especially a special two people who couldn't be here live tonight because they're both extremely ill, and we wish them all the best. Please get well soon. You know who you two are. You may not know who the other is, but each of them knows themselves who they are. So I hope you can hear us. Let us know in the chat if we're all good. Last year we had quite a lot of gremlins at this stage that we weren't able to fix, and I'm hoping that this year we don't have gremlins and we don't need to fix anything. With the traditional greeting, Mr. Mike is already in the chat. Greeting peasants and comrades, says Mr. Mike. And World Anvil have joined us, light up the forge. Thank you for joining us, World Anvil, as always. So, we have got pre-submitted questions from our lovely Discord community, our server, and our patrons, which I will be bringing up on the screen in the time-honoured Inside the Rookery tradition. We'll also be taking questions from the chat, as always, so pop your questions and comments in there. And also, we'll be taking questions and comments live from our studio audience. It's exciting when I get to say that. So please, if you want to do that, stick up your hand and we'll work something out with mics. Right, so before we get into the pre-submitted questions, welcome back to Lynne. We've had you on before, and there's some follow-up questions from last time. I'm sure you'll be pleased to know. And welcome for the first time to Stuart.
Thank you.
I will pass over to Stuart and Lynne to give themselves a brief introduction and an introduction to a very special 50th anniversary we're celebrating today.
Yes, congratulations to Chaosium, 50 years.
50, yeah.
I'm Stuart Boone. I'm an author, editor. We've been working with Chaosium for some time now. The work that people probably know me best for, since we're in Scotland, is appropriate, is Shadows Over Scotland, which is a Chaosium product, and soon to be re-released, one hopes.
Let's not tempt the publishing gods there. Yeah. We don't invoke the publishing gods because they are capricious and temperamental. My name is Lynne Hardy. I am the line editor for Rivers of London, the role-playing game at Chaosium Con. I also occasionally sneak off and do Cthulhu stuff these days in my role of senior associate editor, and I added the senior because I've been doing it longer than the other ones now, so I promoted myself.
Good job. Well done. Right. We applaud your promotion.
Yeah.
And yes, it's, well, it's not quite 50 years. I believe that the actual official anniversary is later in the year, but this is the 50th year for Chaosium, which is very exciting. Let's face it, there's not many role-playing game companies make it to 50 years, so it's very exciting.
We were saying we're finding it equal parts exciting and alarming that 1975 was 50 years ago. I don't like that.
Yeah, we really are. Do you know when the actual anniversary is later in the year?
I think it's August, September time.
Yeah.
But I can't honestly remember. And obviously founded by the late and much missed Greg Stafford, who was responsible for so many wonderful games, and was just a genuinely lovely person who my favourite memory of was a convulsion in Leicester many moons ago, screaming "F the numbers" at a crowd of people who were there to listen to me give a talk, which was one of the funniest things I've ever seen in my life. But yeah, he was absolutely wonderful, and thanks to him, 50 years later, here we are.
Well, to the raiders from World Anvil who are just joining us, we are talking with Stuart and Lynne about Eldritch Horror, and we will be getting into those questions very shortly after we talk about what is the experience like here at CYMERA Festival. Have you had a good time this year?
Yes, I mean, this is my first visit, and I only arrived this morning, so I got up at 5 o'clock this morning to get the train in nice and early, so I'm slightly, do forgive me for being a little bit sleepy and yawny, but no, it's lovely. I've never been here before. The last time I spent any time in Edinburgh was a good 30 odd years ago. Oh God, it is 30 odd years ago now. When we came up for New Year, was when my friend had an apartment at the top of Leith Walk, before it was really starting to be gentrified. So it's nice to be back. It's nice to actually get to see a different bit of Edinburgh, and everybody's been really lovely and friendly.
Yeah.
Good. That's what I like to hear. If they hadn't been, I would be having words with the local Edinburgh associations.
We'd call an Edinburgh town meeting.
I would actually call an Edinburgh town meeting. Yeah, it would happen.
And this is quite a good venue. I was actually here just a few weeks ago with another con, but people have been fantastic. And this, like for you, it's my first time actually at CYMERA.
Oh, is it? Yeah.
So I've really, really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's a really lovely venue at the Pleasance, and we can see Arthur's Seat and Salisbury Crags. You feel like you're outside the city, which is kind of an Edinburgh experience anyway, but yeah. And it was really busy at the author talks and all the workshops today. We were in the games area, and that was really quite loud and busy at one time, with like 3 or 4 or maybe 5 different games being demoed or ongoing. So yeah, we had a great time. We're friends of CYMERA, and we hope we'll be back again next year. I think this is our 4th year.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
That's right.
Right, so Martin asks, BRP underpins some outstanding and long-lived products, Call of Cthulhu, Pendragon, RuneQuest. What elements do you feel underpins this success and longevity? And what is BRP for those who are not inducted into the acronyms of the arcane?
Oh, gamers love acronyms. BRP is basic role playing, and it is the basically it's the percentile system that is underneath Call of Cthulhu, RuneQuest. Pendragon's a D20, but you know, times it by 5, you're fine. And I think part of its longevity is the accessibility. Certainly in terms of my brain works, is that percentages make sense to me. I can look at a skill and a percentage and go, oh yeah, no, I've got roughly this chance of succeeding at something. Or heck, what the hell, it's 5% chance I'm going to do it anyway, because, you know, as Terry Pratchett said, 1,000,000 to 1 chance it's happened 9 times out of 10. So, and I think that's the real thing, is that it's accessible, it's easy to understand, it's easy to work out how good you are at something by looking at those numbers.
There's a simplicity and an elegance to it.
Yes.
That I think a lot of other games probably don't have. A lot of other games focus on their mechanics or crunch. I think the nice thing about BRP is you can just sit down and within seconds you understand exactly what you're doing.
And 50 years of Chaosium, Mark McGee asks, what do the next 50 have in store?
Oh, I think it's got to be world domination. Let's face it.
You couldn't possibly do worse than the current world kings. And there's a strange question that's come in, but we have to know the answer. Sue Edgen asks, I'm Australian, and I've heard that there are lots of Australians at Chaosium. If true, how did this come about? Do we naturally gravitate to this material?
Yes, and yes. But to be to give that a little bit more context, yes, there is actually. There is quite an Australian contingent. Not just working directly for Chaosium, but who have carried the torch for Chaosium products over the years, particularly Call of Cthulhu and Pendragon, ably headed up by Mark Morrison and Penny Love, who, as far as I am aware, I don't know the exact history, was sort of like in the leaner times when Chaosium wasn't necessarily producing as much stuff, were literally carrying the banner to keep it going, and they formed a really strong community who absolutely love the games and are, you know, very fervent supporters. And of course, Mark Morrison and Penny have produced some absolute classics in the back catalogue that people are still playing today.
So you heard it here first, Sue Edgen.
It's a great setting, actually. I mean, for Call of Cthulhu, it's got so much in the dream time and everything else going for it. And it's a huge area.
It is massive, yeah.
Have you written a scenario?
I haven't written a scenario in Australia.
Have you?
I did proofread Terror Australis, but that was as near as I got to that one. One of these days I might get there. But,
what did you write?
I wrote a small scenario for Dean Englehart and Co. And it was a really fun one because it was teenagers. This was pre-Stranger Things, but if you can imagine sort of Stranger Things in Australia, in a seaside town, it was a bit Lost Boys and a bit sort of crazy things happening. It was a lot of fun to write.
And of course, you've got the added thing of literally everything is trying to kill you anyway. Eldritch Horror makes a nice change of pace, I would imagine.
From funnel web spiders and things like that. Yes.
And John Peck, a regular in the questions, asks, what's your favourite Chaosium product?
Do you have one?
Do you have one, Andy?
I do. You guys might have two. You might have your favorite one that you've made, and then
Yeah,
someone else's
yeah.
favorite. I mean, for me, I was telling Lynne I meant to bring the prop along, but I forgot. But my first edition Stormbringer, I think, would be my favorite. That was I've got that very early in life. And
Yeah, I was just saying I really love the cover of that. We've got that at home as well.
But sadly, I don't have the cover anymore. I had to get it rebound in hardback
really?
because the cover, because it was that well loved that the cover had gone. So yeah.
I think I'd have to say the first edition, just the box. Do you remember the thin box for Call of Cthulhu? That was my sort of gateway drug into the whole Lovecraftian gaming thing. So that has a special place in my heart. Yeah.
In terms of narrowing it down, I would say Paper Chase. I think that is a beautiful little scenario. You can play it 1-to-1, or you can have a few more investigators if you want. But it's a beautiful evocation of horror and personal horror and weirdness, and it's just pitch perfect. It's just really lovely, and it's a great introduction, which is why it's in the starter set.
And this goes back to the last time you were on the show, Lynne. So Lazy Cat asks, Lynne, any exciting updates on Rivers of London as featured in earlier episodes of Inside the Rookery? We've had a few people on to talk about Rivers of London over the last year or so.
Well, in Liberty's Shadow, which is the American source book, is due to release sometime in the next month or so. But again, we're not invoking the distribution gods, because they are just as fickle as the publishing ones. So yeah, that's out soon, and that's taking the stuff that Ben's had in the novels and novellas and expanding that out. So that's Helen and Nash did a huge amount of work on that, and it's a lot of fun. So it's basically, if you're a little bit intimidated by London and want to play X-Files, Scooby-Doo, Supernatural, or Buffy the Vampire Slayer, that's kind of the setting for you, because there's a lot more freedom to go wild, because there is no American equivalent of the Folly. And it's a lot of fun. The stuff that we've actually written and run for that is huge amounts of fun. And it's just a different angle on that world. And I'm currently indexing the next book, which is a scenario collection. So it's gathering together the 3 that have been released as print-on-demand standalones, along with a new scenario that hasn't been published before, another exclusive short story by Ben, as there is at the front of In Liberty Shadow. So if you want to be completist,
yeah, you need it. You need it.
These. You do need them, because you ain't going to see them anywhere else. And also, this scenario collection has the Talking Fox character creation rules at the end of it, because basically everybody wants to play Talking Fox at some point.
Yes, we do. Who, me? I do love a talking fox. So I will go to, I was going to ask, sorry, a comment's come up that's really thrown me, but because we've got a board member from CYMERA here. So Mr. Mike asked, why is this called the CYMERA 5 Festival? And since it's called CYMERA Festival, how many chimeras are there? And could a man of particular skill, such as myself, fight them or ride them? So we'll have to find out like why it's called CYMERA at some point, but we won't put you on the spot right now. We don't know. We haven't, Mr. Mike, we haven't seen any chimeras as of yet.
Sadly, no.
No, certainly not. And if we had, we probably wouldn't tell anyone, because then we'd have to call another Edinburgh town meeting to explain why they were here. And any teases, Martin asks, for upcoming books in any of the lines? No time frames required, he hastens to add.
Well, see, I've got to be careful what I say, otherwise I'll get shot by marketing.
Yeah.
Particularly as this is live streaming. Obviously, Sutra of Pale Leaves will be coming out soon, which is, they have announced the second part. So it's the first part of a sort of 2-part campaign set in 1980s Japan with the King in Yellow. So the first part is Sutra of Pale Leaves, and that forms its own little 3-scenario mini campaign, or you can play them independently if you want to. And then the second half, which I can't remember the name off the top of my head. That's kind of like another 3, as far as I remember, another 3 scenarios that again you can run as a mini campaign, or you can pop the whole lot together to form this big overarching story. So that should be a lot of fun if you like your King in Yellow. So that's the main one I can talk about. Mike's already said this on other things, so I'll take a risk. He's busy working on the Innsmouth update, and he is planning on some point getting out some Arkham scenarios to help support the Arkham sourcebook as well. And there's lots of other amazingly cool things in the works that I daren't tell you about because I will get shot if I do.
But watch this space.
Watch this space.
And you've both been running. Oh, sorry, Andy. Did you
Well, I was
want
going to say, since you mentioned King in Yellow, like, have you found since there was a bit of like more mainstream interest in that with like True Detective and stuff, has you found that's prompted more interest in it in an RPG space? Or
I mean, yes, probably. You know, TV things, that tends to bring in people who wouldn't necessarily have heard of the game, or they go looking for it, and then they will stumble across links, and they will come in and they will go, oh, that sounds interesting. Obviously, there's the big King in Yellow campaign already, but this is interesting because it's more modern. It's more modern. It's 40 years ago. Sorry, I know that upsets you, but the 1980s is 40 years ago now.
No, it's not true.
So it's still technically a historical piece. It's definitely vintage. If you're going by official definitions, vintage is 30 years or older.
oh dear,
Yeah, we're all vintage now, guys.
Britpop is vintage. That's horrifying.
So I think yes, there is interest in it, and I think this is going to be a nice, interesting take on it. And Keris and the Sons of Singularity have done a lot of work to make it interesting and just a little bit different, just to confound people and make, change things up a bit.
Yeah, terrific.
So we'll turn to Eldritch Horror now. So Master of Sock Puppets asked, what differentiates Eldritch Horror from other horror subgenres?
Oh, I'm going to let you start with this one.
To my mind, it's the Lovecraft element, is particularly the incorporation of cosmic horror. So looking at the sort of nihilistic aspect of horror, that's a bit different from just your slasher, your monster sort of genres. The Lovecraftian element of the cosmic nihilism. And certainly, I mean, one of the huge things, obviously, for Lovecraft was fear of the unknown. And there's an absolute, I mean, the Call of Cthulhu game itself is wonderful for that, for providing an opportunity for players to examine and explore their own feelings in terms of approaching the unknown, whatever it is. It's usually, of course, something horrible. But so I think those are the aspects I would come back to. It'd be sort of the Lovecraftian elements, cosmic horror, nihilism. What else?
It's that whole extra level of horror in realizing that you are meaningless to these ancient powers, which is part of the nihilism and the cosmic side of things, and the fact that you're beneath their notice. You're not the be all and end all, which you are in a lot of other games. You are this pesky little ant who's running around, who might be an occasional irritation, but you're not really worth any particular notice or interest. And that adds an entire different element to it. So it can be very atmospheric, very, as you said, nihilistic.
Well, I mean, but you make a very good point in terms of, whenever you're playing most role-playing games, you're playing some sort of aspect of a hero figure, whereas in Call of Cthulhu, you're very much just a puny human being.
Yes.
You're about to be crushed, mortally crushed, or go insane, which is another wonderful mechanic that we have in Call of Cthulhu that doesn't feature in very many games at all. But the idea that you can actually end your journey, if you will, simply by going mad.
So the best you're going to get are small victories.
Yes.
But in the overall scheme of things, you're never going to win.
No.
And while a lot of that might not appeal to everyone, but
Certainly
it can, and obviously that's why we're here. But you can get some really rich role-playing opportunities out of that, can't you? It's sort of like standing up and facing the inevitable, even, because that's the right thing to do. Even though in the end, you're not going to succeed. And you do get some really good storytelling opportunities with that kind of setup.
You really do, because you're having to sort of face your own fear within that context. I mean, you put yourself in the place of a character. It might be the 1920s, it might be Gaslight, it might be Regency, but whatever the era is, it's that sort of human frailty, I think, and that was a big part again of what Lovecraft was writing about, especially, you know, in terms of madness, but you know, feeling yourself in that frail position, what would you do?
Yeah.
You know, what moments can you have that perhaps are actually heroic, that are hopeful, but then ultimately
Quietly heroic, though, isn't it?
quietly
Rather
heroic,
than
yeah,
splashy
exactly,
heroic.
yeah. But ultimately, you're going to get squashed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Secondhand Samurai earlier in the chat said that Wifrip has both BRP and Call of Cthulhu in its backbone, and I think in terms of Eldritch Horror, like that really rings true. Like earlier Wifrip editions had a madness mechanic, and
They
I know
did.
that players really missed that. Like a lot of old school players who were looking, you know, keenly to 3rd and 4th edition missed that in the mechanic, because it is quite unique to games where you really are dealing with like the horrors from beyond, chaos, eldritch forces, etc.
Yeah. And that's the interesting thing, is that in most games, you're gaining and acquiring and you're going upwards, whereas Call of Cthulhu, it's definitely a downward spiral.
Yeah. I also think that like slasher films and that kind of horror is like really zoomed in. Like the horror is very present and very mundane. And that's kind of what makes it horror filled, because it could just be a person you know or someone following you in the car. Whereas this is really like zoomed out, and it could literally be the angles of this wall where the horror will come from. And I think that's really gives it a really different vibe and a different way for your GM to describe things and for you to play. I'm not a big fan of slasher films, but I really like Eldritch Horror.
And when we had, was it Ross Payton that we had on, who talked about architectural horror specifically as like a sort of subgenre?
Yeah,
within that.
subgenre, which is
kind of-
terrifying.
yeah.
I do find architectural horror genuinely terrifying. Yeah. And so to follow up that, because you mentioned hope there, so Suejan asks, is there a place for hope when exploring a tale of cosmic horror? And could you give some examples?
As long as you can dash it away from them at the worst possible moment.
I mean, I suspect as players, you're always hoping, but you might be hoping to outlast the enemy, but that's never actually a possibility. That's the whole nihilistic aspect. You're going to die. But then again, I mean, that's human experience. But I think hope does play an element in that. I think, you know, you have to have that sort of conflict between what you can, and agency comes into it, of course, as well. So how much agency do you have? How much hope does that give you? And then it's the slow, sort of inexorable, creeping death that ultimately gets you. Doesn't that sound great?
Cheerful. Cheerful.
Fun times.
Had the audience played Call of Cthulhu? I assume you're, yeah. So you're fully up to speed with the creeping horror. So Eris Shrugged asked, we've seen relatively few Miskatonic River Valley set scenarios in recent years, both from Chaosium and the Miskatonic repository. Has Lovecraft Country lost its appeal?
Don't know.
No, absolutely not. They're still the best-selling products. Things that are set in that area are the ones that groups tend to go to, because that is its traditional setting. And as I mentioned, Mike is busy working on scenarios that will be set in and around Arkham. There will also be stuff set in and around Innsmouth once the Innsmouth book is out. He's mentioned this before, so I'm not going to get into trouble for saying it. He's also working on Kingsport and Dunwich as well. So all of those books are going to be updated to 7th edition, and they're all going to have support material. So there's going to be lots of stuff in the Miskatonic Valley to come. But, you know, there's only so many hours in the day, and I haven't actually managed to work out how to clone all of us yet. Once I do that, you know, we'll be getting more and more stuff out, but, you know, that might be a few years off yet.
That's fair.
It's an interesting question from Mr. Mike. So in the chat, could things like classism be an Eldritch Horror? Or maybe I'm reading that wrong. What do you think? Classism?
I think he means classism.
Does he mean classism?
And then I guess like the existential crisis of, can we compete against late stage capitalism, or is it just going to grind us down into nothingness? I suppose there are definite Eldritch elements to that. Yeah.
And obviously that's something that underpins Gaslight and Regency as well, is the class system. You're like, what can you actually achieve when you are constrained by these incredibly tight social limitations, restrictions, expectations, because you have to be seen to behave a certain way, because not only are you dealing with Eldritch horror, but you are also potentially dealing with societal banishment and castigation, because you've gone against social norms. And so that's an interesting thing, particularly with Regency and Gaslight, is the fact that you've got that overarching Eldritch horror, but there's also that horror of not conforming, which also plays into things, and that's fascinating to see people dealing with at a table.
And obviously, race was a big factor in the Lovecraft Country TV show as well. So there is that. Any of these institutional pressures that are beyond you add an extra element of threat,
and also grounds the scenario.
Yeah.
Because it's something that, even though we don't necessarily experience to the same degree these days, you know what it is, you are aware, and that instantly draws you in, grounds it.
It's okay.
We'll take him out later and deal with him.
So it's not as bad as the year we had the dog and the door bang.
Yeah.
So that's, again, the wonderful thing about things like Call of Cthulhu, because they're set in the real world, you've got that immediate identification and grounding, which can really help ramp up the tension and the horror by just shifting things ever so slightly.
Love it.
I think also money in class is a superpower. Like, what's Batman's superpower? He's a billionaire.
Yeah.
So I think, like, if you have, well, it's true, he is, and it is a superpower. And I think if you have, if you're walking through an Eldritch mystery as a billionaire, it's very different, and doors open to you that don't for a normal person who's struggling not just with the Eldritch horror, but also like the everyday horror. So you've got, the Eldritch horror looming above you, but also the very real fear of, but I still need to pay my rent, and I still need to eat, and I still have real human concerns, which I think if you introduce class into it, you remove those concerns, which sometimes can be good for the storytelling, the story that the GM or the party wants to go through, but sometimes it can be really helpful to introduce that tension and have barriers from class or money that otherwise you wouldn't have.
Yeah, I mean, and there's always ways to introduce conflict or tension, even for people who have a tremendous amount of money. There will be scenarios or situations that they'll have to deal with that might be, absolutely horrific in one area or the other.
And money isn't going to buy you out of that situation, because, as we've said before, Eldritch terrors from beyond space and time really don't care that you're rich.
No.
Yeah.
Not at all.
Yeah, I didn't, sorry, poor wee Hilda got a fright when the door banged and wanted to protect us all. Someone's defending the honor of the dog from a few years ago in the chat now, which is fair enough. No slight was intended on lovely Hilda, who was just trying to protect us all. So Ben has a comment. So Lovecraftian horror is a really useful narrative tool for exploring the concerns of our lives, because the alien nature of the being makes them great for metaphors. You're nodding, Stuart. Is that?
Yeah, absolutely. I would completely agree with that. I mean, again, what it allows us to do, I think, when you're dealing with the cosmic void, it provides you with a kind of dark mirror to hold up to our world, and so you can see different sort of shades of what would you say? I mean, different ways of experiencing things, but yeah, I suppose one of the great things that Call of Cthulhu, I think, allows us to do is see a world behind the world, to see behind, whether or not it's class or race or what have you, but then also the fear of the unknown, not knowing what's out there. We're continually offered, again, as players and keepers, to push the boundaries of what we understand. So it becomes I would say, I mean, it's extremely exploratory in terms of human emotion, human capabilities, human stories, human narrative. I think Cosmic Horror actually provides you with a unique lens that you don't get with a lot of other games.
I was really blown away by Lovecraft Country, the TV series, because it did feel like, I'm not great with horror, but actually the true horror of that was the race issues and the racism. And it really brought home. I've never really watched a show that wasn't about that tackled that, and I thought it was really, really good, because you had this Eldritch horror, but then you had in your face all the time the genuine, like, real, and I kept on having to say to myself, that was real. People did go into towns and get burned to death. Like, that's not part of the Lovecraftian horror of this show. That's the real horror. It was a really interesting juxtaposition. We've got a question from the audience. I'm excited.
Yes, I kind of wanted to build on the discussion.
Yeah.
Because my friend Graham Walmsley argues that there's a moral imperative when portraying cosmic horror to portray it as something that is punching up. So you portray it as late stage capitalism, you portray it as the bad guys and all of these things, and you should always be careful never to punch down. Like Lovecraft, which was, you know, the dirty blood or whatever, these ideas of people being beneath you. Do you subscribe to those ideas? Do you like thinking about it that way? Do you think that lens is kind of outdated?
Well, I mean, as various people know from having listened to me do these things before, my ideal is to get Lovecraft spinning so fast in his grave that we actually solve the world energy crisis.
Yes.
So, yeah, no, we are going to go out there and we are going to subvert everything that he wrote because he was a thoroughly unpleasant person. And this is our mythos now. The thing that you have to remember with the Cthulhu mythos is that it was a shared world pretty much from the get-go. But it's our shared world now. It's our job to shape it to reflect our concerns of the world, which is what Lovecraft and his cohort were doing then. And obviously, some things haven't changed, regrettably, sadly. Other things have. And as Stuart was saying, it's an interesting way of holding a mirror up to the world and dealing with concerns in a controlled manner. And that's the thing, because you have control over it.
Yeah.
And that can be cathartic. It can be actually quite soothing and restorative.
I would actually argue that most of Lovecraftian horror, as it's played out in a role-playing game, actually is about catharsis. It's about dealing with the unknown, dealing with our fears. So it does have that there as a very strong sense. But to come back to your question, I don't think I would necessarily do one or the other. But I think the nice thing again about having an open sandbox is that you can tell all kinds of different narratives. And yeah, I would come back to the idea of it being a dark mirror.
I think the mistake that some creators make is if they have a faction or a group that is bad and has tropes that are objectively bad, like mutation, like evil things that they do to innocent people, they forget that the other faction automatically seems good by default, and that's something that afflicts some of the most famous and widespread settings, because, you know, those who own Space Marines have said many times they're not the good guys, but when you hold them up against some of the people that they go up against, because of how they look and how they act, and because of the tropes that they put along with them, it's sometimes really easy to go, oh, well, they must be the good guys. And that way, like, lies a really difficult conversation that's too nuanced for a kid who's walking into a shop and is like, I want to play the good guys here.
Yeah.
And so I think there is a moral imperative to a certain extent that if you're depicting pure evil, then you really do need to depict pure evil and not have the other guys like kind of evil too. Because people do want to have like a good side that they root for. And I think some creators kind of get a bit muddled when they start out like that and then they see it becoming a bit more confusing for their consumers and their viewers.
You also have to draw a line. And it's the thing that we drew the line with Acton Cthulhu, and when I was line editor there, that I was very, very clear about, because we got some fairly unpleasant pitches for that, as I'm sure you can imagine. And it was a case of, it's not the mythos that caused the hideous, vile acts that were committed during World War II. That was people.
Yeah, and it actually happened. Like, we shouldn't forget that.
So, you know, we're not giving those people a get out. Oh, Cthulhu made me do it. No, that was you. That was humanity, because humanity can be pretty blooming horrible. And we're not excusing you by saying you were made to do it. The angle that we went for was that people are horrible, and now they're trying to use the mythos to do the horribleness because they've discovered it, and wow, this is actually going to make it even more horrible. But yeah, you know, you have to be careful with things like that. You can't use the mythos to excuse humanity's evil.
No, if anything, you want to do the opposite.
Yeah.
Actually use it to show the evil. And I mean, one movie that's actually quite good at that is The Mist, which some of you probably have seen. You get to the point where, you know, there's horrible things outside. No one wants to go into the mist, obviously, but the real horrible people are, you know, it's the people inside.
Yeah.
And so there's almost no one that's good. And I think that's also possibly a Lovecraftian element, that, you know, there's evil everywhere. That sort of omnipresence of evil is problematic, and it gives us another thing that we can use in narratives.
Yeah, White Wolf's Black Dog imprint had a bit of that problem, that they tried to be really edgy with the stuff they had in Black Dog, but it just seemed like they were blaming the ills in the world on like bad werewolves or bad groups of people.
Didn't they literally have, like, Hitler was possessed by a wraith?
They did,
Literally,
yeah.
Which you're just like, no,
Just
you've
no.
lost me at that point. Yeah.
I found, like, going back to Werewolf really depressing, because obviously in Werewolf, like, all the roots of the ills of the environmental catastrophe of the world are, you know, the weaver's gone, and the worm are, like, in conflict. And I was like, but it's still happening. Like, Werewolf, you were trying to, like, fix that, and if you could just fix this one corporation and get the balance back, you could fix everything. And now looking back on it, I'm like, that was so, like, 90s hopeful. It hasn't really panned out like that, as we've swung all the way around to, like, climate deniers and vaccine deniers, and really, like, maybe the Matrix was right in 1990, whatever was the peak of human civilization. 101
Vintage civilization.
Vintage civilization, yeah. Stephen King was heavily influenced by H.P. Lovecraft when he wrote The Mist, says 101 Colonel.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and Sailing Ocelot agrees with you, Lynne. Very important to draw an important line. I think that's a really good point and a good angle to go for. And Ben feels that the problem with 40K is that it was written for adults, but it had aesthetics and a market that drives it to 11-year-olds. And then how do you get nuance across to an 11-year-old?
Did you see Abs had a wee Rivers of London question there?
Oh, no, I did not. I'll go back to that, because I've got... Mr. Mike always has to give us a Horus Heresy question. But I'm going to go to Abs first, because he was first. Abs asks, are there plans for a Scotland sourcebook for Rivers of London, or some published scenarios, Waters of Leith release?
Well, Hedge and I, funnily enough, were discussing this over dinner this evening. Waters of Leith will probably always be its own thing. There is a Scottish scenario that I have, and I will be going back to edit once I finished indexing the next book. That will be part of the next scenario collection release, which I can't remember if I've spoken about before, so I'm just going to say we're branching out beyond London with the next scenario collection, and there is a Scottish scenario in there. But yes, I would love to. Stu Sellens of Miskatonic Playhouse has written various things on policing in different parts of the UK for me, so that I have them at my disposal as and when my nefarious plans take shape.
I heard that Loch Ness has more water in it than all the rivers and lakes of England and Wales put together. And if that's true, like, what would that mean for Loch Ness and Rivers of London?
Yeah.
Like, what does that mean? Is it a truly epic entity?
Probably means it's got more than one, because these are the rules that Ben has set down. So rivers like the Rhine and the Danube, because they're just so big, there isn't one genius loci that is in charge of all of it. So there will be multiple. So yes, it's probable that you've got multiple different genii locorum, like duking it out over Loch Ness and different
depth level. It's all about the depth in Loch Ness. It's not about the size, it's the depth.
And probably the bit at one end is like got its own genius loci, and then the bit near the sea will be sort of like completely different.
Yeah, I love that. That's really...
But of course, Ben's next novel is set in Scotland.
Yeah, exactly. He's been doing lots of research about Aberdeen.
Oh, yes,
it's
it's great.
It
It was a thoroughly enjoyable read, because he does keep sending me things I don't have the license for. Then I have to completely forget everything in them. But no, it's good. Stone and Skies, that launches 3rd of July, I think. So yes, there's definitely Scottish Rivers of London content on the way.
Imagining you could do some kind of like Who's on Fourth, kind of like pun with it.
Forgiven.
101 Colonel says, imagine a scenario based around the laws of Edinburgh. Now, to me, that says the hills, right? The laws of Edinburgh.
I think
does he just mean me and Andy? Me and Andy and the girls. Yeah, the 7 hills of Edinburgh is what immediately came to my mind when someone says law. Okay. Oh no, we've already done that one. Sorry, I'm trying to do more than one thing at once tonight, which is difficult. So Suejin asks, compared to other TTRPG genres, do you think cosmic horror also offers different lessons or applications to real life, and what might these be?
I think we've kind of covered
Yeah, we
some of
have a
that.
little bit, haven't we?
We have touched on that. I mean, role-playing games can be many things to many people, and that's the joyous thing about them. So you can play them purely for entertainment. You can play them to work through things. You can use them to really examine issues in the world through that lens that puts it at one remove, so it's easier to deal with. And again, it's this whole thing about control. So yeah, I mean, it depends what you want out of gaming.
Yeah.
You know, you may
That's
not
true.
want to deal with that in your games,
Yeah.
and that's fine. But that may be the reason that you're gaming, and that is also fine. And as long as your entire group is on that page, that's good.
Absolutely. And like, obviously we do a weekly Warhammer like live stream in our game, and there is like genuinely something that you do feel, even though you're playing in a world which is like, 5 minutes to midnight, the world's going to end within the next decade, and it's impossible to stop, but there's nothing you can do. You still come out of that feeling more optimistic about the world, which is potentially 5 minutes to midnight, in the real world. So it definitely does help you, help you come to terms with that.
You've got to remember as well that, particularly with historical things, particularly with the 1920s setting and the racism and the classism and sexism, it's a case of how much of that do you want in your game. And you do have to look at that carefully, because that may still be your players' lived experience, and they may not want to deal with that at the table when they're dealing with it in their everyday life.
Absolutely.
And again, this is all down to social contract and discussing with your players what they actually want out of their games to make sure that everyone is enjoying it and is getting something fun, but also potentially useful out of it.
So another question from the chat from Krim Gelto. Good evening. Is crime and mystery integral to Eldritch Horror?
Mystery is.
Mystery,
Absolutely.
definitely.
Yeah, I mean, one of the common sort of structures that I use in terms of thinking about a scenario campaign is, what's the intrigue? What's the thing that's driving the mystery? So there's usually, and particularly that focus on the unknown, so that itself is mysterious. Crime is often, I think, a useful, what would you call it, tool?
It can be, yes.
To open the door to what the mystery is, or perhaps something that looks like a crime, but ultimately becomes something much more nefarious, is one way you can use it. So I would say that's possibly more just, crime might be a tool, but the mystery is absolutely 100% integral to it.
Sailing Ocelot says crime is a useful tool to open doors.
Yes, it is.
Yep.
And
Whether it's a lockpick or a crowbar.
That's right.
And Sage says, plus it's really cathartic when the bigoted NPC gets eaten by the Eldritch Horror.
Totally, yeah.
Just as well as the good guys, we're all equally small in the eyes of those entities. Yeah, I think there's nothing more satisfying than watching like a big bad guy who thinks they're like really important just be eaten by the bigger fish.
And it's the interesting thing with Call of Cthulhu, and it's come up numerous times in discussions with various people over the years, is the fact that you would think that going mad and dying would be really depressing, but as long as you give those players their moment to shine in their, the characters, their moment to shine in their final moments, that can be really sort of like, I had a heroic death, even though it's completely pointless in the end. I went out in a blaze of glory, one way or another. And that's actually quite entertaining, really, at the end of the day.
It's quite entertaining. And of course, the other thing it's a very human experience, because we are all on this planet for a short time, and we hope to have our moments of greatness, but ultimately, what are we facing? Darkness and death.
Thanks, Drew.
You're welcome.
I'm so glad you came in this stream. Some Abs wants to put you on the spot. He says, I have Ben Aronovich, I always get his name wrong, Aronovich, on a pinky promise to play Rivers of London at CYMERA next time he is here. Lynne, are you interested in running a game with him here sometime? Maybe a Waters of Leith with Hedge. I won't hold you to it, but it will be a lot of fun. Or maybe an Aberdeen scenario, or maybe a scenario of Stuart's. They're just going mad in the chat. Sorry to put you on the spot for this one. On a live stream, feel free to swerve this one. I did not swerve it.
Too late to swerve.
Too late to swerve.
Ben always says that he was a terrible player and an even worse GM, but he has sat in on quite a few of the games that I've run, and he's very useful as an NPC who knows all the legal stuff and can throw in real spanners, but entertaining spanners when he's there. So, I mean, who knows? Anything is possible. I am quite happy to run anything. Hedge, what do you think?
I mean, we just need to get even up here.
Yeah, we do. I'm sure we can come up with something.
Excellent.
Did Abs recognize your voice and literally know you were in the room? Yeah. I was thinking that he just tuned into your voice.
No, Hedge is standing Abs for today.
Okay, that makes more sense. Yeah, so here's quite a specific question from Mr. Mike, who always has to fit in a Horus question. Last question, he promises, could someone like Horus in the Horus heresy be counted as an Eldritch Horror? He bends reality and has near infinite power, but he was a man.
I know absolutely nothing about
Yeah,
the
might
Horus
have to
heresy,
hand over
so-
to Andy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, much like with Warhammer Fantasy, it's chaos, like, which is essentially ripped off from from the Cthulhu mythos anyway. So
yeah, and a bit of Michael
mixed with
Moorcock.
a bit Michael Moorcock.
I think that's a yes.
So yeah.
I wouldn't say of the Primarchs, I wouldn't say he's the most. He doesn't jump out as the most Eldritch to me. Like Magnus Red, maybe, or
Well, the reason he might be more Eldritch in terms of what we're talking about is that he's less in your face horror than some of the other Primarchs who are more like overtly, huge horrific monstrosity that devours people's heads and things like that. Whereas he looks like a perfect human. He
also looks exactly like the Emperor.
Yeah.
So because we were talking about Eldritch Horror, like turning a mirror, it's like who is the true evil? The person who looks exactly like the person on the gold. Like there's something in that, I think, that's a bit Eldritch.
And the evil, but hidden behind the apparent perfection is a very powerful trope, I think.
Yeah. Right, next question. Eris Shrugged asks, what should Call of Cthulhu learn from the critical and commercial success of Delta Green scenarios like Impossible Landscapes and perhaps more importantly, God's Teeth? And I know, Andy, you're more aware of these scenarios than the others of us on the panel, so maybe give us a bit of chat about them.
Exactly. I both asked Eris Shrugged for more details and then also went on like a deep dive online, like reading scenarios and stuff. And these are not necessarily the scenarios you want to read in the middle of a day when you're about to do a live stream in the evening, because they are pretty dark. But yeah, I think a lot of what, and this is actually, I believe Eris Shrugged is Ben, who's in the live chat. Like partly that was to do with the darkness of some of that. Like, these are scenarios that really go into, again, some really evil human stuff, but tie it in perhaps a little bit with the Eldritch Horror, but also that they're quite epic in terms of their scope. They're covering a very long period of time, but also there is that element of control, not quite railroading the PCs, but there is somebody pulling strings behind the scenes. So it's maybe, I suppose, doing a lot of things that conventionally people don't do in RPG scenario and campaign writing. So I think that's largely what Ben's getting at.
I haven't read either of these, so I don't know. But it's something, certainly with Stygian Fox, they looked at a lot of darker material that we wouldn't necessarily do in the main Call of Cthulhu line. Because, like it or not, we are kind of mainstream. So there are things that it is more difficult for us to tackle responsibly than it is for independents to go and do. So independent licensees and people like Delta Green, they can push boundaries that we can't necessarily. And that leads to the development of interesting ideas and different takes on things, which keeps the market fresh. Also, as I mentioned, there's not that many of us and there's only so much we can actually get out the door at a time. So it's good having other people bringing in interesting ideas and pushing those boundaries to see where you can go. And again, it's horses for courses. That might be something that you want to look at. It might be something that you don't want to go anywhere near. And the fact that there is that choice available is a good thing for everyone.
Yeah, I agree. Ab says in the chat, God's Teeth sounds so dark. And by all accounts, it really is.
Yeah.
And maybe like not what I would like to do in my role-playing sessions, because I prefer my horror a bit more fantasy and grim and gritty, perilous. But yeah, there should be room for everyone to explore whatever aspect of like the world and their life that they want to. Ben says it was a great explanation, Andy. So.
Thank you.
Oh, here's a question for me, which I'll be able to cover really briefly, I think. So Suejan asks, when Lindsay and Andy Law were creating props for Masks of Nyarlathotep, which is a really like a seminal Call of Cthulhu campaign, how did they come up with such a variety of penmanship styles? So Andy Law did the re-release, the new edition of Masks of Nyarlathotep. He redid all of the maps and the props, and he had quite a few letters and journals to do. He was quite pressed for time, and I like a bit of calligraphy, so he asked me for some to support him with a little bit of that. And so I did Suejan things like I looked for primary sources, I looked for what the people would have been taught at school at the time, where they were in the world, what kind of writing instruments they might be using. So like the font, so what I did was I created like the actual artifacts with like copperplate pens or with field pencils, and then Andy took them, digitized them, and made them way much better than my initial research that I did for him. But yeah, so there's one where the person's out in the field, and I did write that in like graphite pencil, which I'd sort of sharpened with a knife rather than sharpening with a pencil sharpener, and just had a look at fonts or handwriting styles that people would have used. So yeah, I call them fonts, but they weren't. They were actual handwriting. I then painstakingly copied the loops of to work out how they would look. So that is the story behind Masks of Nyarlathotep. Okay, so Eric Shrugged asked, at a time when the horrors of the real world press in ever closer, how is that changing our relationship with cosmic and eldritch horror? And the follow-up is, will we pull away from the catharsis we once found in it? Will we snuggle closer to it as it reassuringly unreal? Or will we find some other stranger relationship to it?
Well, given the way that sales are going, I think we're snuggling closer to it.
Excellent. Good news. Good news.
And the Miskatonic repository is doing incredibly well. And again, it comes back to that control. Yeah, real world is horrible, but we go play horror games because we can control that horror. We can confront it in a controlled matter at a time and place of our choosing. And that's the important thing, is that you have that control over it and your engagement with it, as opposed to just watching all the crap unfurling all around you on the news these days.
I suppose it's like a microcosm of what you were saying in terms of the mythos, right? That it's a shared universe, and it's obviously a shared universe at a publication level, but then around the table, it's a shared universe between the players and the GMs. And it is, like I have found in the games of Call of Cthulhu and of Delta Green and of all those kind of adjacent properties, that often those are some of the most collaborative tables. There is much more that sense of we are all on the same page. And it's maybe because there isn't that adversarial side where the GM is trying to kill you and you're trying to kill the monsters. Yeah. But instead, you all know you're going to die. So you're trying to tell the best way for you to get to there to kind of die in a way that feels either dramatic or deliberately anticlimactic or whatever you're going for, but you're going for it together. So.
And again, it's an arena in which we can face, the horrors, and those can be the horrors of the everyday, or they can be the horrors of, the cosmic void. It doesn't matter. Ultimately, they're shades of horror, and being able to express, I suppose, some of our real world fears in a fantasy environment. Again, there's the aspect of just being safe. It's a safe place that we can explore our feelings to that.
Yeah, absolutely. 101 Colonel says they found after 9/11 more horror media was consumed, and it is a case about something horrific happening and people looking to control, have some cathartic effects. Or maybe sometimes I feel it's like if you're sad and you listen to sad songs, if you've had a breakup and you somehow find comfort in the media that you play matching the mood you already have. I do think there's something in that. It acts as like something validating you, but also helping you work your way through it to the other side, maybe.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Well, we're almost at the end of our stream, so thank you so much for joining us. You've been doing workshops, haven't you, at CYMERA? Because one of the beautiful things about CYMERA is all the writers' workshops. Some of the audience have been to some today. Andy Law, who's not with us because he's not well at all, has done workshops for CYMERA before, map making for novelists, for example. And I know that some people in the audience were in your workshop today, Lynne. So and
Yes.
you're doing yours tomorrow, Stuart, is that
Mine is
right?
tomorrow.
Yeah, so
Apparently I bumped his.
Yes, you
I'm
did.
so sorry.
were you just like, what an interesting topic, I must come?
No, Abs got in touch with me and said, would you like to come along? Ben's been before, he really liked it. So I checked with Ben and yes, he did. You know, if Ben was happy, then I'm sure this will be good. And yeah, so we sort of like chatted about the sorts of things that I could do. You know, because I want you to feel like you've had good value out of me. So workshop today, this, and then I'm running a game in the morning.
Or what are you running in the morning?
Rivers of London, of
Oh,
course.
Exciting, exciting, of course. Like, why did I even ask?
I only moonlight with Cthulhu these days, you know.
And I'm running a session on bringing Scotland alive in role-playing games and fiction.
Exciting. I really like that one. That's a good one.
Good.
Yeah. We're, well, obviously, we're Scottish, big Scotland fans. We like to consume Scottish media. Well, thank you so much for coming. Thanks for sharing the news about the future tidbits that people were asking in the chat. Ab says you have Ben's seal of approval, and some people have just, Sage says Lynne's workshop was very good, and I know that Sage has already been working on her own game. She's been scribbling away in her notebook.
I've told her that I want to see it this time next year, so, you know, I'm really looking forward to that. I'm bringing my coloured pencils ready.
It's on video now.
No escape.
It's on video.
No escape.
You're being held to account. Creme Gelto is going to fly from Chicago next year. I'm not sure that's true. We'll see. We'll see. And Ab says thank you from a distance. Thank you so much to Rooks and Lynne and Stuart. You were horrific. Creme Gelto says thanks for the thoughtful discussion and awesome stream. So thank you so much to everyone for joining us. Thanks to the audience, who I will throw it open to one last time in case anyone has any final questions or thoughts they want to share. Oh, yes.
Let's try to end up with a little fun thing here. So, you've been transported back into the Call of Cthulhu universe. What Eldritch Horror would you like to snuggle up with to just send you into the madness?
The Hounds of Tindalos.
Ooh.
Every time, because they're the first ones I encountered. Like, I remember reading the short story about them at school and being just absolutely like horrified and terrified. And I would go into like round buildings and I would be like, why did they make this building round? Is there something I need to be concerned about? Because I was quite an imaginative child and it really like deeply affected me my whole life. So yeah, I would be welcomed home by the dogs.
I think honestly, if you're looking for snuggles, you can't do much better than a Shoggoth.
Yeah.
You could completely be enveloped in it. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, so that might be a good one.
Well, if you want warm and snuggly, Cthulhu surely, because he is like a hairy little bat thing. Well, not so little,
Not so
but but this, I never know how to say this. Zulcha, the one that's the big green pillar of flame.
Yeah.
At least it would be colourful.
Yeah,
Exactly,
and might keep you warm.
And might keep you warm.
Yeah, you get like nice decoration in your room while you perished. Your neighbours would see a good show.
Yeah. I think like I'm going to go old school for like Cthulhu. Something like you could make a little nest inside that big tentacle dribbly face. That'd be lovely. Wrap yourself up like a big fleshy scarf.
We'll let you have that one.
Brilliant. Oh, well, thank you so much for joining us. And thanks to our live studio audience. Thank you. Yay! Thank you to our patrons, as always, who make these streams delightfully ad-free. Thank you to our Discord community for pre-submitting all your questions. And thank you to everyone in the chat for engaging and accompanying us on one of our live streams when we were out and about. We'll see you next week for more Inside the Rookery. Until then, goodbye and caw-caw, caw-caw. See you soon.